The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest room Caroline Webb had ever seen. It stretched so far that the ceiling disappeared into shadows, and floating platforms carried delegates from 100 different alien species. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had no solid body at all. The air smelled strange, like metal and flowers mixed together. Caroline stood alone at the small podium reserved for petitioners. She wore her best diplomatic uniform, dark blue with silver buttons, and she kept her back straight, even though her legs wanted to shake. Behind her, somewhere in the observer gallery, her aide Derek Huang watched with nervous eyes. This was humanity's 4th attempt to join the council. 4 times they had applied. 4 times they had been told to wait, to prove themselves, to be patient. But this time felt different. Earth had done everything right. They had followed every rule, filled out every form, and waited 3 long years for this moment. High Arbiter Voxesthal sat at the center of the raised platform where the senior council members gathered. He was tall, maybe 8 feet, with green scales that shimmered under the lights. His 4 eyes never seemed to blink. When he spoke, his voice came through a translator device that made it sound flat and cold. "The matter of Earth's application for full membership," he said, not even looking at Caroline. "The council has reviewed the submission." Caroline held her breath. "It is denied." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She gripped the podium to steady herself. Around the chamber, she heard sounds that might have been laughter from species whose bodies she didn't understand. "May I ask why?" Caroline managed to say. Her voice stayed calm, even though her heart was pounding. Voxthal finally looked at her. His 4 eyes showed something that might have been boredom or contempt. "Humanity lacks civilizational maturity. Your species has only possessed faster-than-light travel for 62 standard cycles. The minimum requirement is 500. But the Polani were accepted after only 200 cycles," Caroline said. "And the Polani demonstrated cultural unity," interrupted a voice from the left. Caroline turned to see Delegate Cyrith of the hegemony. She was serpentine, her long body coiled around a floating disc. Her scales were deep purple, and her eyes were like yellow slits. "Humans still fight among themselves. You divide yourselves into nations, into factions. You argue over resources. How can such a species be trusted with the responsibilities of council membership?" Caroline opened her mouth to respond, but another voice cut in. This one came from the Kreeth delegation. A group of insect-like beings with sharp mandibles and compound eyes that reflected the light like broken mirrors. "Perhaps in another 1,000 cycles," the Kreeth delegate said, making a clicking sound that the translator rendered as amusement. "If your species does not destroy itself first. Young races often do." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Not all species laughed the same way. Some made high sounds, some made low rumbles, some simply vibrated. But Caroline understood the meaning perfectly. They were mocking her, mocking humanity, mocking everything her people had worked for. She thought about the ships Earth had built, the colonies they had founded, the diseases they had cured, the peace they had maintained among their own kind for decades. She thought about the scientists working through sleepless nights, the diplomats who had spent years learning alien customs, the ordinary people back home who believed that today would be the day humanity finally took its place among the stars. None of it mattered to the beings in this room. "Is there any way to appeal this decision?" Caroline asked, keeping her voice steady through pure force of will. "The council's decision is final," Voxthal said. He was already looking at his datapad, already moving on to the next item on his agenda. "Earth may reapply in 100 standard cycles. This session is concluded regarding your matter. 100 cycles. 100 years. Caroline would be long dead by then." She gathered her documents slowly, giving herself time to think. Around her, the council moved on to other business. A trade dispute between 2 species she had never heard of. They had already forgotten about Earth. Derek met her outside the chamber. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Ambassador, I'm so sorry," he whispered. Caroline didn't answer right away. She walked down the long corridor that led to the human delegation's quarters. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that glowed with soft light. Beautiful, she thought, cold and beautiful, like everything else about this place. Contact Secretary Morrison, she finally said. Use the priority channel. Tell him it's time for option 7. Derek stopped walking. Ma'am, are you sure? Option 7 is. That's the contingency that. I know what it is. Caroline turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but something hard had entered her eyes, something that hadn't been there an hour ago. They called us children. They laughed at us. They don't know anything about what humanity has done for this galaxy, and they don't care to learn. She started walking again, faster now. For 60 years, we have served quietly. We have helped without asking for credit. We have solved problems that they don't even know existed. And in return, they laugh at us and tell us to come back in a century. What will option 7 do? Derek asked, hurrying to keep up. Caroline didn't slow down. It will show them exactly what happens when humanity stops being helpful. It will show them what their galaxy looks like without us. They reached the door to the delegation's quarters. Caroline paused with her hand on the panel. They think we need them, she said quietly. They think we came here begging for acceptance. But here's what they don't understand, Derek. We didn't come here because we needed them. We came because we thought we could help. She opened the door. Now they're going to find out what happens when the help stops coming. The door closed behind her, and Derek stood alone in the glowing corridor, wondering if the galaxy was about to change in ways no one had expected. Secretary Nathan Morrison had served Earth for 40 years. He had white hair, deep lines on his face, and eyes that had seen too many disappointments. But when Caroline's message arrived, he moved faster than he had in years. Within 6 hours, every important leader in human space was connected to the Situation Room in Geneva. Some were there in person. Most appeared as holograms, their images flickering slightly as signals traveled across light years of space. Admiral Patricia Cole commanded the United Earth Defense Force. She was a tall woman with gray hair, cut short, and a voice that could make soldiers snap to attention from across a room. Governor Luis Delgado ran the Martian territories, where 3 million humans lived beneath protective domes. Director Samantha Price led the Office of Strategic Intelligence, and she knew more secrets than anyone else in the room. There were dozens of others. Scientists, engineers, governors, admirals. The people who kept human civilization running. Morrison stood at the head of the long table and told them what had happened. When he finished, the room was silent. I am invoking Protocol 7, he said. Starting now, all of our classified support operations will begin shutting down. All treaty obligations with Council species are suspended, and all humanitarian aid programs will start pulling back. Admiral Cole leaned forward. Sir, once we do this, we can't take it back. The whole galaxy will know what we've been doing. That's exactly the point, Morrison replied. They should know. They should have known from the beginning. What happened over the next 72 hours changed everything. The Polani were the first to feel it. Their homeworld used a communications network that was old and fragile, held together by software that human engineers had been quietly maintaining for 40 years. When those engineers stopped their work, the network crashed. Suddenly, the Polani couldn't talk to each other. Their banks couldn't process transactions. Their hospitals couldn't access patient records. Their government couldn't coordinate with its own departments. The Kreth were next. Their military fleet, which they boasted was the most powerful in the sector, used navigation software for their faster-than-light drives. Very few people knew that this software had been designed by humans and provided freely as a gift of friendship. When the Kreth received a message informing them that continued use of the software would require a licensing fee, they discovered that the fee was larger than their entire military budget. The hegemony controlled the most important trade routes in known space, or so they believed. What they didn't know was that those routes were only safe because of 47 human-operated stations hidden in the empty space between star systems. These stations used gravity manipulation technology to keep the routes stable. Without them, the routes became dangerous. Ships started reporting navigation errors. Some disappeared entirely. And then the Council itself discovered its biggest secret. For 50 years, every species in the galaxy had used the same translation system. It let the Kreth understand the hegemony. It let the Polani talk to the Council. It made interstellar civilization possible. Everyone assumed that some ancient species had created it long ago. No one had ever asked where it came from. It came from Earth. Human scientists had invented it. Human engineers had built it. Human technicians had maintained and updated it for half a century, and they had done it all for free, asking nothing in return, never telling anyone the truth. Until now. Director Price presented her report to the Assembly 3 days after Protocol 7 began. 17 species have sent emergency diplomatic requests to Earth, she said. The hegemony's economy has lost almost a third of its value. The Kreth have recalled their entire fleet, convinced we're about to invade them, and the Council has called an emergency session for the first time in 200 years. Admiral Cole pulled up a map of the galaxy. Hundreds of distress signals blinked across it like red stars. I want to be clear about something, she said. We haven't threatened anyone. We haven't sent warships anywhere. We haven't attacked anybody. All we have done is stop helping. Morrison nodded slowly. That's the difference they never understood. They thought we were weak because we helped. They thought our kindness was something to exploit. They never realized that our help was holding their civilization together. The holographic display showed more and more distress signals appearing. Economic collapse on one world, communication breakdown on another. Supply shortages spreading across entire sectors. What about the Vorani? Morrison asked. Price allowed herself a small smile. The Vorani are very concerned. They just discovered that the cure for the plague that almost destroyed their species 30 years ago was developed in a human laboratory. We distributed it through intermediaries, so they wouldn't know where it came from. They had no idea until yesterday. The room was quiet as everyone absorbed this. How many other species have we helped like this? Governor Delgado asked. Hundreds, Price answered. Medical research for 17 different species-specific diseases. Agricultural support that prevented famines on 34 worlds. Environmental cleanup on 12 planets that were becoming unlivable. Engineering assistance for failing infrastructure across the outer systems. She paused. And that's just what my office knows about. Other departments have their own programs. The true scope of humanity's contributions to galactic civilization is something even we don't fully understand. Morrison looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues. Some looked satisfied. Some looked worried. Some looked like they were still processing what they had learned. For 60 years, we served in the shadows, he said. We helped because it was right, not because we expected thanks. We asked for nothing except the chance to be treated as equals. He gestured at the map with all its distress signals. They denied us that. They laughed at us. So now they will learn what their galaxy looks like, without humanity's invisible support. Not because we want revenge, but because they need to understand the truth. The signals kept multiplying on the map. Somewhere out there, a galaxy that had taken humanity for granted was beginning to realize its mistake. What happens next? Admiral Cole asked. Morrison turned to look out the window at the night sky. Now we wait. And we see if they're wise enough to learn. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the largest gathering in recorded history. Every species with the ability to travel between stars sent representatives. The great chamber was so crowded that delegates stood in the aisles and pressed against the walls. The air was thick with tension and the strange smells of 100 different biologies. Ambassador Caroline Webb walked to the petitioner's podium for the second time. But everything was different now. The last time she stood here, the chamber had hummed with bored contempt. Today, it vibrated with fear. High Arbiter Voxthal's 4 eyes followed her every step. His scales had lost some of their shimmer. He looked tired, she thought. Maybe he hadn't been sleeping well. Maybe he had finally started to worry. Ambassador Webb, he said, and his voice through the translator sounded nothing like it had before. The arrogance was gone. The Council has called this emergency session to address the recent disruptions to galactic stability. We wish to hear Earth's position. Caroline took her time. She looked around the chamber slowly. meeting the eyes of delegates who would not have glanced at her a week ago. The Kreth delegates' mandibles twitched nervously. Delegate Sireth of the hegemony had uncoiled herself from her platform and sat rigidly upright. The Polani delegation huddled together like frightened animals. Good, Caroline thought. Now they understand. For 62 years, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. Humanity operated under a simple belief. We thought that if we proved ourselves worthy, we would be accepted into galactic society. So we followed your rules. We submitted your applications. We waited for your permission. She paused, letting the silence stretch. What we didn't tell you about were the other things we were doing. The work we did quietly, without recognition, without reward, simply because it needed to be done, and no one else was doing it. Caroline activated her own holographic display. The chamber filled with light as data began to scroll through the air. The Void Station Network, she said. 47 gravity stabilization platforms positioned in the empty spaces between star systems. They keep your major trade routes safe and navigable. Built by Earth. Maintained by Earth. Cost to the rest of the galaxy, nothing. The display shifted to show new information. The Universal Translation Matrix. The system that allows every species in this room to understand every other species. 1.3 billion linguistic algorithms, constantly updated and improved. Invented by Earth. Operated by Earth. Cost to the rest of the galaxy. Nothing. Cost to the rest of the galaxy. More data appeared. Charts. Graphs. Lists that seemed to go on forever. Medical research programs that created treatments for 17 different species-specific diseases. Agricultural assistance that prevented famines on 34 worlds. Environmental cleanup operations that saved 12 planets from becoming uninhabitable. Engineering support for failing infrastructure across dozens of systems. The information kept scrolling. An endless catalog of human contributions that no one had ever noticed. All of this, Caroline said, given freely by a species you considered too young for membership. Too unstable. Too primitive. The Kreth delegate made a clicking sound. These numbers cannot be real. If humans had done all this, we would have known. You didn't know because you never bothered to look. Caroline cut in. Her voice was sharp now. You assumed that a young species would be selfish, aggressive, dangerous. You looked at our history and saw only our wars, our conflicts, our mistakes. You never considered that those same qualities might have taught us something valuable. She stepped away from the podium and walked closer to the council platform. Our internal conflicts taught us how to cooperate under pressure. Our competitive nature drove us to solve problems no one else would touch. And our supposedly dangerous instincts, we directed those toward protecting others, not because we expected gratitude, not because we wanted recognition, but because helping was the right thing to do. High Arbiter Voxthal shifted in his seat. His scales rippled with colors that might have meant embarrassment or fear. Ambassador. The Council acknowledges that there may have been oversights in our understanding of humanity's contributions. Oversights, Caroline repeated. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. Let me explain something, High Arbiter. We are not angry because you rejected our application. Rejection happens. We are angry because you laughed. You treated 60 years of service like it was nothing. You looked at the species that had been quietly holding your civilization together, and you called us children. No one in the chamber moved. No one spoke. Humanity is not asking for membership anymore, Caroline continued. Those days are over. From now on, if you want our help, you will negotiate for it. Fairly. With respect. As equals. Delegate Sirith uncoiled slightly. And if we choose to refuse? Caroline smiled. But there was no warmth in it. Then I suggest you find someone else to maintain your trade routes, translate your languages, cure your diseases, and keep your planets livable. We've shown that we can survive without you. Can you survive without us? The silence in the chamber was absolute. Caroline turned and began walking toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the vast space. Ambassador Webb, Voxthal called out. Where are you going? This session is not concluded. Caroline stopped but did not turn around. I'm going home. You have our contact frequency. When you're ready to talk to us as equals instead of servants, you can call. Until then, humanity has better things to do than beg for acceptance from people who don't deserve our help. She resumed walking. The doors of the chamber opened before her. Wait, Voxthal said. His voice had changed. The authority was still there, but underneath it was something new, something that sounded almost like desperation. How long would humanity need for negotiations to begin? Caroline paused at the threshold. When you laughed at us in this chamber, you taught humanity something important. You taught us that kindness, given freely, is often mistaken for weakness. You taught us that respect must be demanded, not requested. She finally turned to look back at the assembled delegates. So, take your time. Think about what you've learned. And when you're ready to treat humanity as partners instead of children, we'll be waiting. 40. End quote. 44. 40. 40. 40. 40. 40. 40. 40. 40. 40. 40. She walked through the doors, and they closed behind her with a sound that echoed through the silent chamber like a final judgment. The weeks after Caroline's speech were unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. Systems that had run smoothly for decades began to fail. Trade routes that had been safe for centuries became dangerous. Economies that had grown fat on invisible human support started to crumble. On Earth, the government watched it all happen. Every day brought new reports, new failures, new pleas for help. We're receiving aid requests from 16 star systems, Director Samantha Price said at the morning briefing. Her face was tired, marked by too many sleepless nights spent reading desperate messages from across the galaxy. 3 of them are facing real crises. Not just economic problems. People are dying. Secretary Morrison sat at the head of the table, his hands folded in front of him. Around the room, holographic figures represented leaders from across human space. What kind of crises? Morrison asked. The Polani colony on Vethar is running out of medicine. Their supply chains have collapsed without our logistics support. The Vorani homeworld is experiencing crop failures because the agricultural satellites we maintained for them have started malfunctioning, and there's a disease outbreak on a Kreth mining station. They don't have the medical knowledge to treat it. Admiral Patricia Cole spoke up. Her voice was hard. Good. Let them suffer. They laughed at us. They called us children. Now they can see what happens when the children stop cleaning up their messes. I disagree. Everyone turned to look at the new speaker. Dr. Angela Martinez was small and quiet, easy to overlook in a room full of admirals and governors. But she ran the humanitarian corps, and her voice carried weight. Those crises aren't hurting the delegates who mocked us, Angela said. They're hurting ordinary people. Farmers, miners, children. They didn't vote to reject our application. They didn't laugh at Ambassador Webb. Most of them probably never knew that humans were helping them at all. That's not our fault, Cole replied. No, it isn't. But does that make it right to let them die? Angela stood up and walked to the display, showing the distress signals. We spent 60 years helping because it was the right thing to do. Are we going to stop being who we are just because some politicians were rude to us? The room fell silent. It was the question nobody wanted to ask. What kind of species did humanity want to be? Morrison turned to Caroline, who had been watching the argument without speaking. Ambassador, what do you think we should do? Caroline was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the council chamber. She thought about the laughter. She thought about all those years of working in secret, giving without taking, helping without being thanked. We need to be better than they were, she finally said. That's always been our real strength. Not matching their cruelty. Rising above it, she stood and joined Angela at the display. I think we should respond to the genuine emergencies. Medical crises, famines, disasters. But we do it differently this time. No more hiding, no more working through intermediaries. We show up with our ships, wearing our uniforms, making it absolutely clear who is saving them. They'll think we're weak, Cole warned. They'll think they can use us again. Maybe some will, Caroline agreed. But others will understand. We help because it's right, not because we expect payment. That's not weakness. That's a kind of strength they never learned. Morrison considered this for a long time. Finally, he nodded. Do it. Send humanitarian teams to the crisis zones. But every mission carries the same message. This is what humanity does. This is who we are. And we choose to help even those who wronged us. The first human ships arrived at the Polani colony 2 days later. The colonists gathered to watch them land, their faces showing a mixture of fear and confusion. The rumors had spread. Humans were angry. Humans had abandoned the galaxy. Humans might be coming to take revenge. Instead, the ships opened and medical teams walked out. They set up clinics. They distributed medicine. They worked around the clock to save lives. And when the Polani asked why, the human doctors simply said, "Because you needed help." Word spread quickly. Human ships arrived at the Varani homeworld and began repairing the agricultural satellites. Human engineers traveled to the Kreth mining station and contained the disease outbreak. Wherever there was genuine suffering, humans appeared to help. Not all species understood. The hegemony's leadership declared that humanity was trying to manipulate them, create dependency, establish control. They refused all aid and tried to fix their problems alone, but others saw what was really happening. The Polani High Council sent a message of thanks to Earth, along with a request to open diplomatic talks. The Varani proposed a new kind of partnership, one based on mutual respect and shared benefit. Even some Kreth colonies began secretly asking if humans might be willing to help them too. A new coalition started to form. Some called it the Reformed Alliance. Its members simply called it the Partnership. It was built on a different principle than the old council. Not seniority. Not age. Contribution. Species that worked together, that helped each other, that treated each other as equals. Humanity was a founding member. So were the Polani and the Varani, and a dozen other species who had watched the human response to crisis and understood what true civilization looked like. The old council still existed. The hegemony and some of the Kreth still clung to their pride and their prejudices. But their influence was shrinking. Every day, more systems chose the partnership over the council. More species discovered that cooperation was better than domination. 6 months after Protocol 7 began, Secretary Morrison addressed the Human Assembly. "We took a risk," he said. "We showed the galaxy our anger, and then we showed them something more important. We showed them our compassion. Some will never understand, but many have. And those are the ones worth building a future with." He looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues. "We didn't win by being cruel. We won by being ourselves. Remember that. No matter what challenges come next. Remember that humanity's greatest weapon has always been our ability to care about strangers." Outside the windows, the stars shone bright, and somewhere among them, a new kind of civilization was being born. 5 years had passed since the day humanity walked out of the Galactic Council chamber. The galaxy looked different now. It felt different. Everything had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Ambassador Caroline Webb stood in the central hall of Partnership Station. It was a massive structure built in neutral space, designed and constructed by a dozen different species working together. Human engineering formed the skeleton. Varani artists had decorated the walls with flowing patterns of light. Polani biotechnology kept the air clean and the water pure. Every corridor, every room, every system was a reminder that cooperation was possible. Today was a special day. Today, the Partnership Congress was welcoming new members. Caroline walked to the speaker's platform and looked out at the assembled delegates. So many faces, so many species, all gathered in the same room without fear or suspicion. 5 years ago, this would have been impossible. "Delegates of the Partnership," Caroline said, her voice carrying through the hall. Today we welcome 3 new member species. The Sithrani, who have contributed breakthrough advances in medical technology. The Kelmoth Collective, who have shared their expertise in sustainable energy systems. Anna, she paused and allowed herself a small smile. And the Kreth Federation. A murmur rippled through the assembly. The Kreth had been among humanity's harshest critics in the old days. Their delegate had laughed the loudest when Earth's application was rejected. For them to join the partnership was remarkable. Ambassador Krixtal of the Kreth Federation rose to speak. He was tall for his species, with dark chitin and eyes that caught the light like polished stones. His mandibles clicked softly as he gathered his thoughts. When humanity withdrew its support from the galaxy, he began. The translator rendering his words in a calm, measured voice. My people believed we were watching the tantrum of an immature species. We thought you were simply angry. That you would eventually calm down and return to serving us. As you always had. He paused, looking around the assembly. We were wrong. About everything. The hall was completely silent. What humanity demonstrated was not anger, Krixtal continued. It was restraint. You had spent decades building systems that kept our civilization running. You could have used that power as a weapon. You could have demanded tribute, territory, submission. Any species with that much control over galactic infrastructure could have made themselves rulers of known space. He turned to face Caroline directly. Instead, you simply stopped helping. You let us see the truth for ourselves. You showed us what we had been taking for granted. And then, when we were at our weakest, when you had every right to leave us suffering, you came back and helped anyway. Krixtal's mandibles clicked in a pattern that the translator didn't render. It was, Caroline realized, the Kreth equivalent of deep emotion. My species does not apologize easily. Our culture values strength, and we believed for many generations that admitting mistakes was weakness. But we have learned from humanity that true strength comes from acknowledging errors and working to correct them. He bowed his head, a gesture that humans had never seen from a Kreth before. On behalf of the Kreth Federation, I offer our apologies and our gratitude. We were wrong to mock you. We were wrong to dismiss you. And we were wrong to believe that age and power made us superior. Humanity taught us that character matters more than history. The assembly erupted in applause. Some species clapped hands. Some made sounds with their bodies. Some simply stood in respectful silence. But the meaning was clear. Something important had just happened. After the ceremony, Caroline found a quiet spot near one of the station's observation windows. The stars stretched out before her, countless points of light representing systems that now worked together instead of against each other. Secretary Morrison found her there. His hair was completely white now, and he moved more slowly than he used to. But his eyes were still sharp. Quite a day, he said, standing beside her. Quite a journey. She replied. I keep thinking about that first council session. Standing at that podium, being laughed at. I was so angry. You had every right to be. Caroline shook her head slowly. What I've learned since then is that they weren't really mocking us. They were mocking what they imagined us to be. They had built an idea of humanity in their minds, based on their own fears and prejudices. And they rejected that idea. They never actually saw the real us at all. And now, she watched a ship pass by the station window. It was a joint design. Human engines with Vorani sensors and Polani life support. A flying symbol of what cooperation could achieve. Now they see us. Not as children or servants or threats. Just as we are. Complicated. Imperfect. Sometimes wrong. But always trying to make things better. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was an old coin, worn smooth by years of handling. My grandfather gave this to me when I was young, he said. He told me that humans have always been explorers. Not just of space, but of possibilities. We look at problems and imagine solutions. We look at enemies and imagine friends. We look at the stars and imagine what might be waiting for us out there. He pressed the coin into Caroline's hand. You've earned this. Whatever comes next, whatever challenges we face, remember what we proved here. Humanity doesn't succeed by being the strongest or the oldest or the most powerful. We succeed by being ourselves. By helping when we don't have to. By forgiving when we shouldn't have to. By believing in better futures when everyone else has given up. Caroline closed her fingers around the coin. It was warm from his touch. What about the old council? She asked. The hegemony and the others who still refuse to join? Morrison shrugged. They'll come around eventually. Or they won't. Either way, we've built something good here. Something that will last. He turned to look out at the stars. The galaxy laughed at us once. They won't make that mistake again. Not because they fear us, but because they finally understand us. Caroline stood beside him in comfortable silence. Outside the window, ships from a dozen species moved in harmony. Their paths guided by shared technology. Their communications flowing through networks built on trust, their futures intertwined in ways that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. Somewhere out there, new worlds waited to be discovered. New species waited to be met. New challenges waited to be faced. And humanity would face them the same way they always had. Together. With open hands and hopeful hearts. Ready to help. Ready to serve. Ready to prove, over and over again, that the youngest species in the galaxy might just be the one with the most to teach. The stars had never looked brighter.